Hey Star Wars Unlimited fans, welcome back to another very special video here on Main Deck. Today, we're going to be joined by former DBZ TCG World Champion Sundeep Kutumbaka once again. Last time he showed off his Green Han list. Today, he's going to be showing off his Yellow Palpatine list, and this is no ordinary Palpatine list, but this is one that Sundeep has taken to a total of 5 store showdowns. He has won 3 of them, and he has taken 3rd place at 2 of them against a field of aggressive decks. You wouldn't believe the capabilities of Sundeep and his Yellow Palpatine list, but I'm not just going to tell you about it. Let's take a look at the list and hear from Sundeep himself about what makes this deck tick, what makes it so powerful, and the tips and tricks he has for playing it. Let's jump right into it. What's up, everyone? It's Dan with Main Deck, back again with our man, Sundeep. Sundeep is here with another super sick list to show you guys, and I can't add a lot to this. I'm actually just going to let Sunny, you go ahead. Thank you for taking this list to us. Tell us about your performance with this list, Yellow Palpatine, and what makes it so cool.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me again. So this is one of the lists that I've been playing the last month. In our previous video, we talked about Green Han, which I played for probably most of the month of March and the month of April, and then early into May. But since then, I've been on Yellow Palp. I took it to a total of 5 showdowns and won 3 of them, and got 3rd place at the other 2. So it was very strong performance.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's I was telling you earlier that it's probably the best performance I've had with any deck of the small span of tournaments that I've played a deck. So.
In any card game, and
in any card game, I would say.
Better performance than I've had with anything here. So I guess, Sunny, if we're just gonna start anywhere, what's first of all, I guess, what made you swap from Han to this, and then what's the special sauce in this deck?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about that. So I think last time we talked on the video a little bit about what were the tough matchups that you could face with the Green Han, or maybe what a primary weakness is, and that is the big endgame unit decks that can also ramp. So the decks that I lost to with the Green Han deck were actually mostly red-green. Sometimes it would be blue-green villain control, but I would say that what really stood out was losing to a red-green ramp deck. So I lost in that Richmond top cut to a red-green Vader that ramped to endgame with super laser tech, a resupply, and they had units to drop like Avenger. I lost to Relentless one game. So I took that as feedback and to look into playing that style. So I actually started playing Green Vader and Red Palp right after that event. And as I was playing through it, I saw some people posting about change of heart combos with Palpatine, both as a counter to the Palpatine Steel, but then also with the Palpatine deck itself, right? And that is kind of the premise of why you would want to play Yellow Palp specifically. But there are a lot of nuances, specifics that make Yellow Palp what I think is the best style of playing Palpatine.
Okay. And I just want to interject really quick and mention, because I failed to mention it. I probably mentioned the introduction, which I'll record after this. But it just reminded me of your performance in the old Dragon Ball Z, Panini Dragon Ball Z card game, where I think you were, correct me if I'm wrong, a control player through and through in that.
Yeah. There was a deck that I played the majority of one season in that game. If you know the character from Dragon Ball Z, Master Roshi, so I used to play that deck. The particular year that I had won the World Tournament, and that was definitely a control deck. It was kind of, so that deck had 3 win conditions, or that game had 3 win conditions, and that deck was able to win by all 3.
Yeah.
But primarily it would do that by kind of just slowing down what your opponent was doing, so that you can get to one of those 3 win conditions
Sure.
appropriately.
And I bring that up because I see some, I just feel some similarities here in what you're going after with this deck.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that. So, I didn't actually think about this, because I played that deck in the Dragon Ball Z card game, and while this deck is not a deck I would consider a control deck, actually, a lot of people would consider it a control deck. This deck has a lot of similarities to that playstyle that I had from that game,
Sure.
with the Roshi deck. And what I actually consider this deck as is a disruption ramp deck, or it's a ramp deck that kind of disrupts tempo of your opponents and then has its own tempo plays to end the game. Whereas the control deck, usually, whether it's soft control or hard control in this game, you typically are looking to out units and then outlast, get to an end game and drop big game units, or play to the mill strategy, which has come up in quite a different amount of tournaments with Vigilance, right? So this is not one of those 2 type of control decks. This is a deck where you want to trade early with units, leave damage on units so that you can steal with Palpatine, or get to the Palpatine flip and start stealing units with Change of Heart, and also dropping big game units at that point, so you can kind of be aggro in the end game.
Sure. So lacking kind of the quantity of just hard removal that you would consider kind of a requisite to considering it a control deck. Instead, you're looking to do some disruption and really kind of it looks like what you're doing with this list is just trying to get as much advantage from Palpatine's action as possible with some of these plays too. Traitorous, Change of Heart. You mentioned Change of Heart is, for our listeners, of course, Change of Heart is a good way to take back your unit that Palpatine stole because it returns back to the owner at the end of the turn. Which is you in that case. But for Palpatine, he can, of course, Change of Heart them, and then either through his attack trigger on flip or through his action, he can just sack them after he's dealt some damage with them.
Exactly, yeah. That's why it's so good with Palpatine, and it's almost always live. The only situation that I would say almost always live when you're going to play Change of Heart, right? So you have to be careful, right off the bat, when you're taking a deck like this and then playing Change of Heart, you have to be careful playing Change of Heart where you don't have that extra 1 resource. So I very rarely play it on the 6 on the curve, right? You wait till 7 or much later, right? And then you start, your Change of Heart becomes one of the best cards in the deck. But there are always situations, if you have that extra resource, when Palp is not deployed, to be able to sack off the unit you steal, or if Palp is deployed, you don't even need a resource. As long as Palp can attack, you'll be able to sack it off, and then get a draw and a ping. But there are the small chance situations that an opponent has a response to the Palp when it's out, and you steal it. So you have to be cognizant of that. Or an out that exhausts Palp, for example, to stop it from attacking. Or actually a hard out, right? That will kill Palp on that turn itself, after you've stolen the unit.
Sure. Yeah. So looking at this list now, you mentioned you played against Palp decks. I play against Palp decks. Every person's area is different. In my area, we've had Palp decks, but no one really liked to try the yellow variant in particular. So I would just love for anyone who's out there who's like me. There's going to be some of you who are like, yeah, we play this all the time. That's cool. But what is the secret sauce here to this deck that got you to flip to this and that's led you to so many wins with this? Like what makes this deck tick? Where do you get all the value? Where do you score those wins from?
Yeah. So I think yellow plays really well to Palpatine's strengths of stealing in general. Because I feel like with Palpatine playing the other colors, there were many situations where you wanted the units to be still on board on your opponent's side, but not really threatening you, right? So there's games where you play with yellow where you tend to delay what your opponent can do with their units, right? Whether it be exhaust, bounce, those sorts of things, right? This deck doesn't play a lot of bounce. It tries to keep the units on board, but it has a lot of ways to wall up against units so you don't take direct base damage. It has ways to stop their units from attacking, so just exhausting them with no good to me dead, right? And that's really critical to being able to steal with Palp on its flip turn, and has so many ways to just ping damage outside of just the Palp ability. So if you're relying with other styles of Palpatine in blue, red, oftentimes you're trying to use the Palp effect to sacrifice one of your units and then get that ping on something to steal. And oftentimes players can play around that because it's just one thing that they have to deal with for that. But this deck has ISB Agent that allows for just random 1 pings, and then it has Greedo, which can also hit and ping. And Greedo has a very high hit chance in this deck relative to other decks because there's, I think, 21 cards that are non-unit, depending on the list, but 20 to 22 we can say that are non-unit. And there are a lot of ways you wall up with Sentinels, so they have to trade in and leave damage on their units, or you can in turn trade, right, and leave some damage on their units. Yeah, so that's why I think yellow kind of fit the style of Palp the best, in my interpretation,
Sure.
right? But then there's a lot of also strong cards that I've featured in previous decks. So one we talked about was Sneak Attack with the Green Han list.
I was going to ask you
that
about
I
that
feel
here.
is actually even stronger in this deck than Green Han.
Yeah, I feel that way. As soon as I was looking at this, I thought, okay, Sneak Attack, but Palpatine can draw a lot of cards. Palpatine can sack the thing he sneak attacks in.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I was thinking the cards just because with Sneak Attack, you're always going down an extra card, right, to do it. So having a bit of that buffer is nice, but then being able to sack it to get the card back, that's where it, like, yeah. Tell us what do you Sneak Attack in?
Yeah, so the obvious ones are the late game units, right? Devastator and Reinforcement Walker, and then post sideboard Relentless. Those ones are obvious. But then if you think about even more nuanced plays, right? Finer lines. You can start Sneak Attack Super Laser Tech turn 1. It uses 2 cards, so it's not always optimal. But I would kind of, if I'm doing a comparison, Green Han, sometimes you would, if you started resupply and then no unit, a desperate ramp play would be to put down a card with Han, then resupply, right? And that is the same net difference in cards as Sneak Attack and Super Laser Tech. But Palp has a way to draw that hand advantage back later on in the game. Han does not necessarily have that way. And not only that, there are some scenarios where you might not have initiative and they drop a unit in ground turn 1. And that makes the Sneak Attack Super Laser Tech play even more justified, because many times they'll Viper Probe Droid, and then you do that, you trade their Viper Probe Droid and get a instant ramp.
Yeah.
Right? That's mad value. Yeah. And then even if you're not taking out the unit, still taking out some of its health, if it's a 3 HP unit, getting it down to 1 is sometimes impactful, because then next turn you can ping it with ISB Agent and just kill it, right? As an example, or ping it with a Palp effect some way else, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So with this deck, I noticed. Oh, sorry, you had more probably Sneak Attack stuff to talk about.
Oh yeah. So I will mention one more line that's kind of cool with Sneak Attack in this particular deck, and I'll mention it with a card that is played heavily in Palp, which is Royal Guard, but also applies to other units as well. All right, that probably don't see in the list that we're talking about, but I can actually mention it. So with Royal Guard, it's not always going to be live as a Sentinel, because you need that official. And the primary official that you'll have is Yularen, right? Early game. Sometimes you can get Veers mid-game, turn it on. I play the Tarkin unit, so sometimes that can be an official mid-game. Otherwise, late game, you'll have your deployed Palpatine as an official. But in situations where you don't have that official and it's not a Sentinel, how can you get the most value out of a Royal Guard other than it just being a 3/5 body on the board that turn, right? And the turn you play, it'll come out and exhausted. You can sneak attack it in, and then you can use it to trade into a unit in ground. It will still likely stay alive because it has the 5 HP. Then you can sacrifice it off with Palpatine, get a draw and a ping. And I think that's a pretty good play and line to use it.
Okay, so basically you're saying, instead of just relying on always like trying to load up on too many officials or something just to try and turn that Sentinel on, you can use it as a proactive Sentinel, sort of with sneak attack, instead of sitting there and like
it's a proactive trade unit. Yeah. But then, and then it will replace the draw or the hand advantage that you lost will replace itself as long as you have that extra resource, right? And in most situations you do. And the thing that's kind of cool with it is it's a turn 2 trade option, because with sneak attack it reduces the cost by 1, so you can play it on the turn 2, and then you can use the last resource to sacrifice it off.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. That's
and draw.
So because it's going to always be a 3/5. So it's so basically we're just saying
it will likely trade with anything in that situation, in ground, and then replace itself.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I wanted to ask a little bit. I'm going to say for the viewers at home, but it's for me too. I'm probably going to sleeve this up and play it next Saturday at our locals. This looks too fun. So we've got a number of early drop units in here, ISB, Greedo, TIE Fighter too, which I find interesting, as well as Yularen.
Yeah.
What's your general kind of early game plan with these? It sounds like ISB is best to maybe hold on to, try and ping a key thing later. Is that kind of the idea of that, where maybe ties are dropped earlier, or what's your plan?
It's actually, it's good all around most of the game. And I'll explain why. So turn 1, it's not good against everything, right? It's very good situationally against those 1 defense units. And it's even good against 2 HP units, because you can drop it and then you can use Palp, since you'll still have the extra resource to sacrifice it off, get rid of it. Takes 2 actions, but you can do it.
Sure.
And it's good mid-game when you want extra draws, right? So you can ping something and then kind of threaten maybe a later steal, because if you're on the 5 or 6 resource turn, you're kind of getting close to that 8, especially with the super laser tech and command and resupply. It could come out of nowhere. You can go from 6 to 8 real quick. So if you put a 1 ping damage at that point, it's kind of very impactful and it threatens a lot, and then maybe your opponents will think about how to maybe trade their own unit into something you have, or to get rid of it before you steal it, right? So it's impactful in that situation, and it's also impactful right at the flip or right before the flip. Very late game, it's not that impact.
Okay.
At that point, it's pretty much. I will keep it in the hand if I calculate my hand has enough resources to play a big game unit plus that, but otherwise it's oftentimes a resourced unit.
What's the thought process behind including Tile and Fighter here?
Yeah, okay, so that was very, very critical. And I'll explain why. So the worst matchup for the deck is aggro in general, but specifically early space aggro. So if a opponent starts with a deck like Sabine or even Leia, and they start with a A-Wing, then next turn followed up with Wing Leader, or even Fleet Lieutenant hit you for 5, right? Something like that, and then they can do that again unanswered the following turn, right? That hurts so much, and you feel like you might be getting blown out of the game playing Palpatine. You might not have enough time to get to the flip turn, right? So early on, I was thinking of ways to combat the situation, and my answer was cards like Seven Fleet Defender, Consortium Star Viper, um, I Am Your Father, because yellow doesn't have the hard out, so you can't play like a Power of the Dark Side in aspect, right? So you have to play the black card, I Am Your Father. Those all came into effect turn 2 or later. So if it's the unit, Seven Fleet Defender or Consortium Star Viper, they come in exhausted turn 2, and then they don't make an impact till turn 3, right? Tai LN, it gives you a way to make an impact going into turn 2 itself against that early space aggro unit, especially comboed with a shoot first and a ISB agent, right? So A-Wing has 3 defense. You can play Tai LN and ISB agent, get it down to 2 defense, and then trade into it. But the best thing, obviously, is Tai LN, and then going the next turn, you have a shoot first, and you take out the A-Wing, right? That's one of the reasons why I call this a disruption tempo deck, disruption ramp deck, is because I feel like if you do the disruption right early game, then you can get to the late game and win with your own tempo, right? So that's why Tai LN made the cut in my more recent builds. And I think it performed well, especially in my most recent showdown. I played against 6 aggro matchups and won all of them.
I'm sure there are going to be Palpatine fans out there who can't even believe that record being possible. I mean, can you talk a little bit? I mean, that's got to be the hardest matchup for Palpatine. Can you talk a bit about? I mean, other than what you just explained about dealing with A-Wings, how do you navigate that matchup?
Yeah, so space aggro is the worst, right? But that deck and those type of decks can beat this type of deck in so many fashions, right? It can beat them in ground and then continuous pings with Sabine. If it's Leia, it can action compress and beat you that way, right? So in ground, you have 2 clear ways to combat that. That is wall up with the Sentinels. So I play both Cell Block and Royal Guard. If there was a yellow Space Sentinel, I would play it, but there is not. So not yet, at least, right? As of set 1. Yeah. So, but in ground, those are your primary start options. You want to play a Yularen turn 1, and if you've gotten that hand and mulligan into that hand, ideally you would play Yularen and then Royal Guard, and then they have kind of a work cut out to them to trade into that, right? And then by the time they trade into that, you may also get some extra heals off of following up with a super laser tech or some other green unit, right? Because Yularen keeps triggering. And if you get to the late game, which as long as you're doing one of these 2 strategies and you haven't been blown out by something, you might be still in the late teens, early 20s in damage against one of these decks. And it is critical to be cognizant of what healing potential you have going into even what healing and stealing potential you have, right? So healing, I like to maintain a Yularen on the board if I can, going into the 7 resource turn and the flip turn. 7 resource turn and the flip turn, reason why is there's a Vader play, right? So you Vader heal 1, and then you can Vader into an Emperor's Royal Guard or Super Laser Tech, some other green unit, right? And then you'll heal 2. The 8 turn, you can keep a Yularen on board. If you kept a Yularen on board, you can drop a Reinforcement Waka, heal 4, right? And that itself makes enough of the difference. Like if you go from 22 damage down to 18 damage, that kind of wins you the game against these decks, because now time is back on your side, right?
Sure. And it looks like you have a few things in the sideboard that you'd probably be considering for those matchups.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So there's extra shoot first. Sometimes you can mainboard the 3. So this deck is very flexible in that aspect, as you can, in the sense that you can make the meta call for the tournament that you go into, and then tune your main deck for that, right? So I've changed this list over those 5 tournaments by a few cards here and there based on a meta call I was making. Outmaneuver is really, really good in this deck, and that's one of the sideboard cards I'll mention for aggro. And I'll probably bring up an anecdote for that of why it's pretty good. So it's not as good as you would think it could be early, right? So when I started playing around with this deck and that as a sideboard card choice, I was actually early game mulliganing for it, just hard mulliganing for it in those aggro matchups, and now I think that's a wrong decision, because you don't want to see it that early. You want to see it where it's going to block off or prevent the most damage possible.
Sure.
Right? So if you're using it and it's saving 3, 4, 5, 6 damage, it's not that impactful, especially early, right? But if you see it close to the flip turn and you suddenly exhaust their board and then you go into the flip turn in a situation where you can now steal everything, it's extremely impactful. So in one of the store showdowns I played in, I was going to game 3 and I was in that situation where I had a lot of damage taken, probably near 20 damage, and my opponent had 4 or 5 units in ground at this point, and he was playing Leia, right? So he could action compress them too and just kill me. He had game damage on board, and this was the flip turn, right? So I had to the previous turn claim early before even attacking or trading, because the first thing I could do on the next turn is outmaneuver his whole board, flip Palpatine, steal one of his damage units, then overwhelming Raj, because I have 8, right? And the rest of the units attack with Palpatine, clear his board. So it's very critical in those situations. That's just an example. That's not always going to line up that way, but it's an option, right? There's another situation where before the flip turn, I've exhausted maybe 3-4 units in space, right? And then I immediately claim initiative, steal 1 in the next turn, and then stay alive that way. Right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, again, an example of where Yellow's ability to just control the board without taking things off can actually be advantageous for you specifically. So yeah, that's cool.
Definitely, very much so.
You also have just a few other kind of interesting, I mean, you know, you've things like another Traitorous, another Grand Moff Tarkin. I think the most curious about when the Tarkin comes in.
Yeah, that was definitely a good question to ask, and something to call out, right? A random Tarkin in the sideboard doesn't really seem that great. But so Tarkin is a unit that I was playing at 2 actually in my main board, and there's reasoning to why Tarkin is especially good in this deck. So Tarkin, I'll first say it's why it's not good, right? It has a bad stat line, 2-3, coming out at 4 resources.
Yeah. And
then it only scries the top 5 cards, or searches the top 5 cards for 2 units. So by searching the top 5 cards, it's very hard in normal decks to hit 2 units off of that. 2 Imperial units, right? Specific units. So you have to really tailor your deck to make that possible. And in this deck, I did that in the sense that I have around 24 to 26 Imperial cards in the deck. There was at one point time I even considered Maximum Firepower, which has the Imperial subtext on it.
Sure.
But that allows you to, so if it's 24 to 26, right, that's about 50% of your deck. And if you're doing the math, 2 and 5 is what you want to aim for, right, above that. So about 40% of your deck or higher should be Imperial. So 50 is pretty optimal. You'll almost always hit on it once, and very often hit on it twice. Now, we talked about why the 2-3 stat line is bad. The 2-3 stat line is actually so bad that it's good in this deck. That's okay. And the way that I'll explain it is it's largely ignored at the time that you play it, because they're like, why am I trading into a 2-3? Let me just leave it on the board, right? Should focus on aggroing your base or trading with some other unit? right? And then what they don't realize a lot of times is that it's an official, and then it will be followed up by a royal guard.
Find the
right?
guard with it too.
Yeah, so you followed up with the royal guard, and they didn't attack it because they didn't think it was worth trading into, right? And another reason why it's good that it's largely ignored is it leaves a body on the board for you to sacrifice with Palpatine and ping and draw, right? So
Sure.
those are the reasons why Tarkin is good, a little bit better and justified in this deck. And now let me talk about why I cite it for certain matchups, right? So Tarkin it excels in the control against control decks because it provides you ways to draw more hand advantage, get to those late game units like Devastator, right? Vader. It doesn't hit Walker because Walker is actually not an Imperial unit.
Yep.
But that's fine. It comes in on the side whenever I'm siding in the third Devastator and Relentless, right? Because it gives you a faster way to tutor those, and then it also gives you hand advantage against those decks. So that's the reasoning. So my take and my approach to those control matchups is ousting them with hand advantage and those big game units, and that's why.
What do you? I mean, I just started thinking about how I would board this. I don't know what you take out. My first thought was like maybe, he's so good, but like you could pull out Greedo to up the number of Imperials by replacing it with those. What do you typically do though?
Okay, so for control, right?
Yeah.
So for control, what I typically would take out is sometimes I take out a cell block guard. Sometimes I take out the shoot firsts.
Okay.
And then traitorous, right, comes out
Sure.
a lot of times especially if they're not playing like green control, right? Or if they're playing, a lot of decks do play green control, but there's if super laser tech is only mainly the target that you're wanting to steal, I take it out.
Yeah.
Right. And trying to think what else. Sometimes a No Good to Me Dead could come out.
Okay.
And Veers could come out as well, right? So this deck, I'm not hard set on I take this out for the situation exactly. In a lot of decks, I had that mentality of I know exactly what to side out and side in. But it's kind of flexible. Like there's a 4 to 6 card siding range, both in the main deck and the side deck. And then I try to work within that based on the nuance of that particular type of control deck, type of aggro deck, right?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Awesome. Okay, well, I think the last thing I just want to ask about then is I want you to I think we did this maybe in the last one too with a different, with I think it was Cunning last time, but with Command in this one, a lot of people are always afraid to play off aspect, double aspect cards. So can you talk about your experience with Command in here? You got it at 2, so it's got to...
Yeah, so Command has a very strong purpose in this deck, and why it is good at that purpose, right? So it ramps. It's an extra ramp card, but more than that, right? It's costly at 6. Unlike Cunning and Vigilance, not all the effects are always great, in my opinion. So with Cunning and Vigilance, I feel like almost always 2 of the effects are great, right? In this deck, that's not always the case. The ramp effect is almost always great. The other ones are a little bit situational. But there's no play, and there's no one card play in this deck at 6 resources. There's combinations of 2s and 4s or 3s, or Palpatine ping and something else. But a straight single card for 6, that's the only one, right? And it is the perfect way to be at at 6 and go straight to 8 for the flip turn. If you have nothing else to do, especially. But another reason why you would want to do that is maybe you played a ISB agent early, right? It's been destroyed either by your own will with Palpatine, or they've gotten rid of it. It'll be in your discard, right? So you can command ramp to 8, get an ISB agent back to hand, so that you have something to ping. So you have something that can ping something to steal, right? Other than just the Palpatine effect. it's critical. This deck is it's really critical to have ways to ping the units that you want to steal, because a lot of times they'll play around just the Palpatine effect to ping, right? So.
That's something I've gotten used to doing greatly against the other Palp decks.
And you can do the same thing even on 7 resources. Instantly, you go to 8, you add back the ISB agent, you play it that turn itself. Because you'll have an extra resource. And then flip. Ping something, steal, right? Yeah. You get instant steal. So either 6 or 7 resources, it's very good. And the last reason it's really good in this deck is you play a lot of those big game units end game. It recurs them end game.
Those end game control. Well, disruption in this case, but these end game ramp style decks really come down to this kind of battle cruiser Star Wars. Sometimes it's like just dropping threat after threat, trying to see who comes out on top.
You'll be in that war a lot versus control decks, and I feel like this deck has so many ways to win that war with Change of Heart and Command, right? And having its own endgame.
Just Change of Heart. I've slapped Change of Heart into like things like Thrawn decks, just to sideboard whatever, but it's never as good as it is when I can Change of Heart the thing and then sack it afterwards too. That is just, that's powerful. Definitely. All right, well, Sonny, I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm definitely sleeving this up this Saturday. Do you have any last pieces of information to give to, someone like me who's about to take this and start playing with it?
Yeah. So one last card. Actually, I'll talk about 2 last cards that didn't make the cut in the list that you're likely seeing. And the first one being is I Am Your Father, right? I think I mentioned that early on about out to space aggro and maybe even other aggro. But I did play that card quite a bit and did perform really well with it. It's not just good for that out. Drawing the 3 cards and drawing into cards that you can combo with sneak attack is amazing, right? Endgame, or just drawing into endgame units is amazing. I would consider that card in certain builds of this. And the last one that maybe a lot of people don't like as a unit, just like the Tarkin unit, is TIE Advanced.
Okay.
So TIE Advanced is a 4 cost space unit, and that gives experience tokens to Imperials. I now play that in my most current list as of just yesterday, right? And it's another way to deal with space aggro that I think is better than Consortium Star Viper and 7th Fleet Defender in a lot of situations. Reason being is it will be able to... there's a sneak attack play turn 2 where you can bring that in. It will be able to buff your turn 1 unit. Like you play Yularen goes to 4/5, or you play ISB Agent that goes to 3/5, right? And then it can trade with a space unit like a red 3, like a let's see, what else?
It is a 3/2. Any A-wing, it can just take the A-wing out.
A-wing and a few other X-wing, right? All those units it will trade. So I feel like that's a great play to make, because you trade with something, you buff the unit, and then there's a follow-up play, which is amazing with TIE Advanced after 4, right? So what is the best card that you can play on 5 in this deck? It's Overwhelming Barrage. Traitorous maybe in certain situations, but it's Overwhelming Barrage. But in this deck, on curve, there's not a lot of good cards to get like a lot of damage off of Overwhelming Barrage. It's very good late, because you'll just clear a board with a Reinforcement Walker or a Vader or something, or even Palp, the leader. But if you're playing it at 5, what are you buffing? You're buffing like a Royal Guard
at best,
and then that's their best thing for 5.
Yep.
But if you play a TIE Advanced at 4, just play it straight up. You make your Royal Guard a 5/7, and then going into 5, it's gonna clear 7, right, with Overwhelming Barrage. Or you even make a Yularen a 4/5, and then it clears 6, right, with Overwhelming Barrage. So I think that's strong enough to consider that card going forward.
The barrage play was the exact thing I was dealing with when I was working with Green Thrawn way earlier at the beginning of the metagame, where I realized my 3 power things were basically always 1 power short of being able to do something really impactful with Overwhelming Barrage. And yeah, tie advance. That's with sneak attack. That is clever. You can even sneak attack a turn later. You can sneak attack in the tie advanced, and then it can trade into an A-wing, live, and then sack to Palpatine or something too.
Yes, yeah, that's possible too. I haven't yet made that play because it's still early. I'm still early in the testing process with that card.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's definitely a play to consider too.
I'm pumped about this. This is the most excited I've been for a deck in the set 1 meta in a while. I am excited to get to ride this out for a few more weeks. And then Sonny, do you want to give us a quick, I didn't prep you for this at all, so I'm sorry, but what's a quick hit on the Shadows of the Galaxy card that you're most excited for when set 2 drops?
The one that I'm most excited for, I think it's Triple Dark Raid. The yellow one that searches the vehicle and then bounces it, and you can play it, right? But it's very hard to figure out this next set for me. I'm going to be doing a lot of playtesting. So early on, and I say this early on, but it was actually probably not that early on. The most pump card, the most hyped I was about a card was Tech, the one that you all actually got to reveal.
Yeah.
So I would say it's Tech because I really like that smuggle mechanic.
Yep.
Right. But me being a player of cunning decks a lot through set 1, I played all the styles, but I think the one style that I played the most is cunning. In a lot of different capacity, and a lot of different combinations. I think Triple Dark Raid adds a lot of possibilities for me to consider.
Very powerful card. So
yeah,
awesome.
Very powerful card.
All right.
The one card I'm least excited about is Crate Dragon. I think that card is probably not so great. For
wow.
The game. We'll see what happens.
Oh yeah. You think not so great for the game, like a problematic card?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if maybe the Vigilance players will finally come out in droves then and be like, okay, hold on, we got to do something about this. It will still take 5 to deal with it, but at least it gets off the board, I guess. So yeah, we'll see. But Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, show off this deck. Super excited. If you guys out there enjoy the list, we do have down below, I'll have a link to the Swooty B list that we have on screen here, so you can go ahead and bring that up and sleeve it up yourself. Enjoy the last few weeks of the metagame, playing something that clearly has the capacity to absolutely crush. So congratulations on your 3-star champion wins and your 2-star champion third places with this deck, Sonny. Absolutely incredible. And thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you again.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Make sure to leave it a like if you did enjoy it. Stay tuned for more Star Wars content, and we'll see you guys in the next one.